Good morning. I'm Specialist Lane Davis, and I'll be giving you your brief today on servant leadership. This brief is unclassified. For our agenda today, we'll be going over our introduction, the characteristics of servant leadership, followership versus servant leadership, how to apply servant leadership in today's workplace, the conclusion, and questions. So please hold all questions until the end of the slides. Introduction. In my brief today, we'll be going over what is a servant leadership, the relationship between servant leadership and followership, how to apply servant leadership at work, and in today's Army, I believe servant leadership is the backbone of the Army and something that we should all strive to be. Characteristics of servant leaders. The first three characteristics we're going to talk about are listening, empathy, and healing. The characteristic of listening the servant leader uses when listening to his leaders and getting orders and effectively passing them down to his subordinates. But also the servant leader uses effective listening when listening to his subordinates, whether these will be personal or professional problems. This will go hand in hand with the characteristic of empathy. If a servant leader is able to empathize with his soldiers and get in their shoes, he'll be able to apply the characteristic of healing at times for personal problems. Once you're able to see from their eyes and the fact that maybe it's a personal problem and not a professional and workplace problem, you'll be able to get those soldiers back on their feet and mission ready once again and able to accomplish any task set ahead of them. The next characteristics we're going to be speaking about is awareness and persuasion. A servant leader has to have awareness of his surroundings at all times. He has to know what's going on above his level and below his level and be able to react accordingly. He uses the characteristic of persuasion when giving a task and he needs to convince others to complete that task in a timely manner. He also could use this characteristic to persuade his leaders that maybe there is a different way to complete this task more efficiently. Next, we have conceptualization and foresight. They go hand in hand with one another, but conceptualization for a servant leader is being able to accomplish the day-to-day tasks, but also plan for the future. This goes hand in hand with foresight in that the servant leader is able to take his past experiences, what's going on in the present day, and then plan for the future as well. Stewardship is the next characteristic we'll be talking about. As a Night Stalker, we have a creed, and in that creed there's a line I think that defines stewardship very well. And that is, I serve with the memory and pride of those who have gone before me. To me, this means stewardship of a profession is being able to conduct yourself as a soldier and as a person in your day-to-day life so that if your people that came before you and the soldiers that came before you see you right now, they could look at you and say, yes, I'm proud of that person. He's a soldier, or he or she is a Night Stalker, and they're carrying on my legacy. A servant leader has to be committed to the growth of people. In this means counseling your soldiers, mentoring your soldiers, and eventually coaching them into a position where they would take the next step and take your job. This is not so much as a competition as it is being able to lead others to better themselves. And once this happens, this goes hand in hand with the last characteristic we'll be speaking about, and that's building a community. Once you have built a community of servant leaders, there's plenty of followers to go around because everyone's going to be able to know their role. Once you've done this, you've effectively created a well-oiled machine, and you'll be able to effectively complete any task that's been given to your company. Servant leadership versus followership. Followership follows the principles of be, know, and do. Effective follower, has to be able to have the character and presence to be able to be trusted with any task that's given to him and to accomplish those things in a timely manner. He uses the principle of know and intelligence in being able to give positive feedback and different points of view, and also knowing when to accomplish the mission and drive on. So followership, to me, falls under the Army values of selfless service and duty. While selfless service relates to both followership and servant leadership, in a way that you have to be able to put the mission ahead of your own goals. And for duty, for followership, it is being able to accomplish that mission and knowing that it is requested of you and is your duty as a soldier to do as asked. And some more things that servant leadership and followership share is effective listening and knowing your role. Effective listening for the servant leader, you have to be able to know what's going on in your surroundings. You have to be able to listen effectively, get all the proper information that's been given to you, and pass that on to your soldiers. This goes hand in hand with the follower, who needs to be able to effectively listen to that servant leader, give positive feedback, and then drive on with the mission. This goes into knowing your role and how these two things play hand in hand. There are two sides of the same coin. You cannot have followers without a leader, as in fact you cannot have leaders without a follower. So you have to know when to step up and be that servant leader, but you also have to know when to be that effective follower. Applying servant leadership in the workplace. So I'm going to ask you all to reflect on yourselves. What kind of leader are you right now? Are you a servant leader, or are you a different type of leader? And if you are not a servant leader, think about what some steps are that you could take to become that servant leader and better yourselves. I personally think that I'm a servant leader and that I'm willing to put the needs of others above my own. Next, I want you to reflect on your workplace. Does your workplace foster effective followership? Do they take your input? Do they value what you have to say? Are you a servant leader in your workplace? What situations can servant leadership be applied to? Truthfully, servant leadership should be applied in your everyday, day-to-day life and being that example that others want to be. But you most commonly see it in missions that are handed down to you from above. That servant leader steps up, takes charge, and accomplishes that mission. Next, what type of leaders have you worked with? Have you worked with servant leaders? Have you worked with leaders that weren't servant leaders? And next, how did that make you feel when those leaders were coaching you and mentoring you? Did you want to become that leader? Or did you, as some of us have always dealt with, think, this is somebody that I never want to be around or anyone to think that I'm like them again? Most of us, as I'm sure you know, have dealt with both types of leaders. So in your workplace, being a servant leader helps you instill effective followership. It helps you build your community. If you are the example that everyone sees, that's what they want to be, then that is what they will be because you are setting that for them. Being a servant leader and instilling effective followership is the first step in becoming a well-oiled machine and a company that can accomplish any task set in front of them. Finally, in conclusion, the servant leader in today's Army is the backbone of our Army. They're truly what we should all strive to be. Any questions? This concludes my brief.